The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
So anyway, a lot of times people ask me, they're like, how do you even find your guests? And I'm like, it's divine intervention. And ironically, here's the funny part about you is that it kind of was divine intervention because I had been looking for somebody to be able to talk about Christianity and Christian nationalism and then Christian Zionism. And all of a sudden, your reel popped up. Your reel popped up in my feed. And then I'm like, oh my God, I know that Instagram listens to my phone. Is it like listening to my mind now? So anyway, all right, everybody, we got a great guest today that I'm super excited about it, as you could tell from that intro. But I've got Hannah Smith here, and she is somebody that obviously I just met through that process that I just explained. But honestly, if you are on Instagram, you need to follow her because, and I told you this, and I genuinely mean it, she is putting out some of the most articulate, insightful, well thought out, but also well delivered content in regards to, a lot of different things and what's going on in the world, what's going on in Gaza, Palestine, what's going on in terms of Christianity and Christian stuff, which we're going to talk about today, and just overall sort of what's going on with this awakening in the world. So Hannah, thank you for making the time. I know you have a hectic schedule, but it's a pleasure to have you on the Deep Shallow Dive.
Thank you so much, Ray, and thank you for the kind words. I think that divine intervention can definitely work through Instagram or TikTok or whatever social media platforms algorithms. So I'm so glad that I popped up on your feed, and I'm so thankful to be having this conversation today. I think everything we're going to be talking about is super important, and I appreciate you reaching out and setting this up.
No, that sounds great. All right, so I think where we should start is kind of give us your background, because if there was somebody to talk about Christianity and Christian nationalism, it's you, because I think that's how you grew up, right?
Yes, I did. I was raised as a Christian Zionist, although I wouldn't know what that term Zionist actually meant. It was just sort of a given that we would support Israel without any question, and that land was given solely to the Jewish people. And in addition to being raised a Christian Zionist, it wasn't just support of Israel that was foundational to the beliefs and the teachings that I grew up with. There was also the dehumanization of Palestinians, which actually, right, it existed in my school textbooks. I was having a conversation with a friend who was raised very similar to me recently, and she actually reminded me of this, and I think this is very important to call out. So I want to share a little bit about what Christian Zionism actually looks like and how that shaped my beliefs growing up.
All right. So Hannah, real quick, before you go into that, can you just help us understand from your perspective, a clear definition, and I know you said it before, but of Christian Zionism, and then if you think there's a difference between Christian Zionism and, I guess, Jewish Zionism?
Yes, happy to provide a definition. So Christian Zionism is the Christian support for Israel belonging solely to the Jewish people. And it's different from, and I think more dangerous than Jewish Zionism for a couple reasons. Christian Zionism is a lot more widespread. For every one Jewish Zionist, there are about 30 Christian Zionists. And on average, like if you walk up to a white evangelical and you ask them, did God give the country of Israel to the Jewish people only? 82% of Christian evangelicals are going to say yes, versus Jewish Americans, it's only going to be about 40%. So Christian Zionism is rooted in a couple different things, but it's really in this belief that it is our role as Christians to support the state of Israel. Jewish Zionism came from, I think, a very genuine place of wanting safety and security. And that's where we get that sort of analogy of it was the ambulance that turned into a bulldozer. But Christian Zionism has, I think, from the beginning been very corrupt. And it comes from really wanting to control things in the world, to objectify the Jewish people as a necessary part of God's plan and Jesus' second coming, and to really be engaged with the world as Christians in a way that is controlling and really puts our faith on other people. And so I want to really make that differentiation. And I think that there has been so much emphasis on Jewish Zionism recently, but not enough emphasis on Christian Zionism, because this is huge. And I will say, I do not think that the United States would be supporting this ongoing genocide if it was not for Christian Zionists. So does that explain?
Yeah, that was really good, actually. That was really good. And so does it all go back to the Old Testament? Like, is this what the Bible says? And is this why Christian Zionists believe it unequivocally and unquestioned? Like, the Bible said it and this is how it is?
So Christian Zionism it's fairly new. There wasn't a Christian support for the state of Israel before 100 years ago. And it really came from after World War II. Christians had to really reckon with their involvement in the Holocaust. And so to say, okay, we were involved in the Holocaust, we were involved in the persecution of Jewish people, and there was anti-Semitism in the church. And so Christian Zionism, in part, came from this idea of we need to sort of pendulum to the other side and really support Jewish people. Did that really end generations of prejudice? No, because it was more about controlling Jewish people than it was about supporting them. And you're not going to end generations of prejudice by sending people to a faraway land. But the story that supports Christian Zionism is from the Hebrew Bible, or as Christians would call it, the Old Testament. And that specifically comes from the story of Abraham. So God told, this is like Hannah's Bible time.
Yeah, I love this. No, this is great.
Yeah. Bible stories with Hannah.
Yeah.
So God told Abraham that he was going to be the father of nations. He pointed to the stars and he said, your offspring are going to outnumber the stars. And Abraham took this very seriously. So Abraham and his wife Sarah were like, we got to make some babies. And Sarah could not conceive. And this put a lot of pressure. Abraham started to doubt his belief in God. And they discussed and basically decided that Abraham would sleep with Sarah's servant, Hagar. And so Abraham sleeps with Hagar. Hagar has a son named Ishmael. Then shortly after, Sarah and Abraham actually conceive, and they have a son named Isaac. And Sarah was like, there is not enough room in this town for the both of us. So Abraham cast out Hagar and Ishmael. And this is how specifically the sort of Judeo-Christian narrative goes. So this is seen as the result, or we were told that this was really the result of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Although we would not have called it that, because we would not have said Palestinian. We would have said Arab-Israeli conflict. And it's really rooted in these two sons and this sort of discontent between Sarah, Hagar, and Ishmael and Isaac. And basically that this region was going to be embroiled in conflict forever, that it was intractable because of Abraham's decision to not trust God and because of the birth of Ishmael. Which brings me, actually, if you don't mind, right, I want to actually mention the verse that played into the dehumanization of Palestinians that was in my Christian school textbooks. Do you mind if I share?
No, yeah,
all right.
That'd be amazing, actually.
All right. So this is from Genesis 16:12. And it says, this was about Ishmael. This was the curse of Ishmael. But he will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. And he will live in defiance of all his brothers. So we were told that verse also applied to all of Ishmael's descendants. And specifically that they were to be like donkeys, like wild donkeys, or like animals. And that would explain why there was Muslim violence, Islamic terrorism, extremism, all that stuff. We were told specifically that it was because of that curse, and that Arabs and Palestinians, we wouldn't have said Palestinians, but that Arabs were cursed with animal nature. How horrifying is that?
I mean, that's insane. Like, that's what they taught you in your elementary school, or was that Bible studies, or where were you even taught that?
So I was homeschooled. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was homeschooled, which maybe explains this. But this textbook was also used in Christian schools. So this wouldn't have been used, obviously, in public schools. Homeschooling was very common and is still very common amongst Christian Zionists, amongst Christian nationalists, really a way to kind of control the education process. But this textbook was not an uncommon textbook to see. And even when I was researching this and kind of reminding myself of how I was raised, I was like, this narrative, this idea that Arabs have animal nature because of the curse of Ishmael is still widespread. This is not like that fringe. And that's a terrifying prospect. We never learned about the Palestinian side of these things, right? We only knew the Israeli side, and basically that Palestinians or Arabs in the area were picking fights for no reason because it's their nature.
And this goes back to the 1600s, or like what year was that book supposedly written?
So this in Genesis, do you mean?
Yeah, Genesis.
Or
what? Like when was
so
that
Genesis
supposedly written?
So Genesis was written long before the times of Jesus. I don't know exactly the time frame of Genesis, but it preceded the life of Christ. It's the first book of the Hebrew Bible. It's the first book of the Torah. So this Genesis has existed for a long time, obviously with different types of interpretations and things like that. But Genesis has existed for a long time, but this specific type of interpretation is somewhat new. A lot of the doctrines surrounding Christian Zionism are pretty new. A lot of Christian Zionists don't realize that or think that, but even the role of saying we need to support a Jewish state so that Jesus can come back, that is at most 100 years old. And that is wild that most Christians have no idea that this was really sort of indoctrinated and embedded into American Christian culture, and it wasn't just a given before this.
Okay. And they really believe that. They really believe that in order for Jesus to come back, well, I guess the first question is, they really believe that Jesus is coming back? Like that's going to happen? I mean, is there a timetable on that?
Ooh, that timetable question. That's a slippery slope. But yeah, how I was raised and how a lot of evangelicals, a lot of white evangelicals especially, still think is that Jesus is going to come back at some point. And there are some signs of the end times. And this belief, by the way, that like the end of the world is coming and Jesus is going to come back, we buy into the idea that things are going to get worse until he comes back. And so that means we expect wars to happen. We expect people to be starving to death. We expect famines. And so there's not this sort of like active or responsibility to jump in and make things better because you're like, well, Jesus is going to come back soon anyway. And so this interpretation of Revelations is really the book at play when it comes to Jesus coming back, the end of times, 7 years of tribulation, all that stuff. This interpretation of Revelations is also very new. And so this idea that it should be interpreted literally, that it should, by the way, let me give you, this is going to be a lot of Hannah theology, and I apologize.
I love it.
It's too much Hannah theology. Okay. So the book of Revelations is the last book of the Christian Bible. Genesis is the first book. So Revelations is a series of letters from the Apostle John when he was imprisoned on the island of Patmos. So there is what he was writing to the persecuted Christian church at the time. And the idea that he was writing in code is and was a common belief in a way to interpret Revelations. Revelations is weird. There's a lot of weird stuff going on there, lots of angels with a bunch of eyes and horsemen and all of this stuff. But it was interpreted as code because he was writing as a prisoner to the persecuted church. Then, as Christianity evolves and develops, as Christianity becomes the tool of empire and all of this stuff, it becomes interpreted as an end times text. That interpretation has sort of laid the foundation for Christian Zionism and laid the foundation for the Christian belief that Jesus is going to come back. We can kind of let the earth go into turmoil. We don't need to get involved. All of these conflicts are expected. It's going to get worse before he comes and raptures us all up. And the rapture, I don't know if you know the doctrine of the rapture. We're really getting into it right now. I don't
know the doctrine of the
doctrine of the rapture.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's just the idea that Jesus is going to come and take all the Christians away, and then there is going to be 7 years of tribulation and trials, and it's going to be terrible. And 2/3 of Jewish people in Israel will be killed. So the sort of end of times that Christian Zionists are ushering in is terrible for Jewish people in Israel. And that doctrine is only like 120 years old. So all new stuff that has been used to sort of manipulate the masses to support, sort of an extension of American imperialism.
So when you, but it's not really you, it's when they say end of times, does that mean like everyone dies, or does that mean the earth explodes? What does that even mean, end of times?
So a lot of people would die. The Christians get taken up. We get to, skip the bad parts, which is just one kind of segment of this belief. And then it's 7 years of plagues and war, and the mood turns to blood. Lots of bad stuff happening. The Antichrist, all of this stuff. And eventually everybody dies. And then there's the establishment of the New Jerusalem, like the kingdom of heaven on earth, which is a very violent end. And some people, get the mark of the beast, and the people with the mark of the beast end up in hell forever. I'm like, how did we get here? How did as Christians, how did we take Jesus's teachings and we're like, oh, let's do this? How any of that makes sense? It's beyond me.
Yeah, that is really like, I mean, for somebody that is not a follower of any organized religion. And again, people that have listened to this podcast, they know this. I mean, I respect every religion, and more importantly, I respect what people believe, and I respect people. So this is not about casting doubt on anything. It's really about helping those of us that don't understand this to try and understand it. But man, it is a hard pill to swallow for somebody that is, I guess, not part of that team. It's a lot. It's a lot. So is there a difference between Christian nationalism or a Christian nationalist and then a Christian Zionist? Are those two terms different or?
They're definitely not interchangeable, because it depends on the Christian relationship with different things. But I think they're both rooted in control and then the imposition of the evangelical worldview on everybody, including non-believers. So Christian nationalism is really about seeing the United States as a Christian nation, and removing that separation of church and state, and seeing Christianity as a necessary component to being American. Christian nationalists will say we were founded as a Christian nation, and we should stay a Christian nation, and we should be praying in schools, and we should be doing all of those things. And there was a lot of Christian nationalism as I was growing up. I had a professor. I went to a Christian liberal arts college. And my professor was like, if you see an American flag near that pulpit, that should be a red flag. And let me tell you, I saw growing up a lot of American flags next to the preacher's pulpit, and a lot of Israeli flags in churches as well. So Christian Zionism and Christian nationalism are like natural partners. It is not a stretch to say, if you think that as a Christian you should have control over your country, that you should also say as a Christian you should have control over your country's relationship with the world, which is really the foundation for the U.S. Or Christian nationalist support of Israel.
Got it. Okay. All right. Man, that is like, there's so many, I don't know if dichotomy is the right word, or maybe hypocrisy is a better word. But like when you were saying earlier that with the ushering of the end of times, 2/3 or 1/3 of the Jewish people in Israel would die. I mean, that to me is like, okay, how are the Jews and the Christians, the Judeo-Christians, so close if that's needed? It's almost like the Christians are wishing for that or wanting that in order to usher back Jesus. How are the Jewish people like okay with that? Like, that doesn't make sense. And then on the flip side, it's like, I don't understand how when in Judaism, and correct me if I'm wrong, they don't believe Jesus is the Messiah. They don't think he's the guy. And I had a rabbi on a few episodes ago, and I asked him that same question. And he said, yeah, we think he's a good guy. We think, he did well, but we don't think he did the things that were needed or the things that were supposed to happen in order to give him like the title of Messiah. Now, I just really crassly said all that, but I think I was pretty accurate with the way I described it. So then there's that dichotomy. So it's like the biggest question I struggle with right now, to bring this into politics, US politics a little, is how and why is it that it seems like the entire Republican Party unequivocally supports Israel? And like if they said, hey, we're going to drop an atomic bomb on Gaza, they would be like, okay, cool, no problem. Let us know what time so we can watch. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a disconnect to me. I don't get it. Maybe, do you understand that with the Republicans?
So I feel like a lot of Jewish people, a lot of my Jewish friends that I've talked to about Christian Zionism, they're terrified by it. They're like, this is scary, and we think more Christians should be speaking against it. Like, we're speaking against Jewish Zionism. Why aren't Christians speaking against Christian Zionism? But because there is anti-Semitic roots to Christian Zionism, and because they, again, 2/3 of Jewish people in Israel being killed in the end of times, it's sort of this real dissonance. But I think that Jewish Zionists, and I think that Netanyahu and others have just realized how powerful Christian Zionists are. And they're like, you know what? We don't agree with these guys. We think that they're dangerous, but their support is powerful and they have a lot of money. And so we're willing to say, you know what? We'll have these guys speak at our events. We want their support and things like that. We had the March for Israel last year had a speaker, televangelist, John Hagee. And this guy, he has said that Hitler was a half-Jew. He has said that the Holocaust was God's plan. Like, this guy has terrifying beliefs, but because he has so much pull, there is this sort of alliance where they're like, you know what, we don't care if you think that we're all going to die in the end times, and we don't care if you're trying to usher that in. If your support right now is powerful, we're going to accept it. And so it's very strategic. I don't think Christian Zionists see it as that, but I think that there's a lot of people within the Israeli establishment who are like, this is helpful for us.
Interesting. Yeah, that guy, I think he's a pastor out of like Texas, maybe San Antonio or something, but he is unbelievably powerful. And I've watched a couple of his videos, and I think he's the type of guy that literally believes that this land of Israel needs to be 100% ethnically cleansed in order to set up. It's almost like making the bed for Jesus to come back home. And man, all right. That stuff's a lot, man. That stuff's a lot. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, one thing you mentioned ironically in the video that kind of made this podcast happen is you talked about Palestinian Christians. And I'd love for you to kind of explain that, because I think right now, for everybody that is paying attention to what's going on in Gaza and just the unbelievable, unfortunate everything of that daily, I think they view that as Arabs and Muslims against Israelis and Jews. I don't even know if people understand that some Palestinians are Christian. So like, can you talk about that a little and why you think Palestinian Christians speaking up is so important?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like even in my relationship with the faith of my upbringing, Palestinian Christians have really shown me. So I just want to start with just some Palestinian Christian appreciation. They have shown me that there is another way to be Christian, and that it is living according to what Jesus talked about. And so that is like a lot of nonviolent resistance. It's a lot of care for the neighbor. It's a lot of the things that we in the West have lost in Christianity. So I feel like Palestinian Christians, in addition to being the antidote of Christian Zionism, they're really also like the antidote to Christian nationalism and this sort of Western individualistic, white-centered, and I didn't mention that before, but that should be emphasized, this white-centered Christianity that I think has gotten so far from the original teachings of Christ. So first of all, just want to express my appreciation for Palestinian Christians. And yeah, we did not know growing up that there were Christians in Palestine, that there were Palestinian Christians. We were always taught that this was Jewish against Arab and against Muslim, specifically Jewish against Muslim kind of conflict. And then the more that we believed that, it was like Judeo-Christian against Islam. And this is the, on top of the dehumanization and the sons of Ishmael kind of rhetoric, it was an idea of it being a religious war. And I grew up with a lot of support in the church against persecuted Christians in the Middle East. So that could have been Pakistan or Afghanistan. People were like, we got to support the persecuted Christians. Never once did they talk about persecuted Christians in Palestine. And so the mere existence of Palestinian Christians is very powerful in this talk about Christian Zionism and in our really addressing how we're going to fix this problem. Palestinian Christians they have the answers, and they have the answers to how to live out faith more authentically, and they have the answers to how do we approach this long-lasting conflict and genocide in a way that really would honor God. And so I think that we as Christians in the United States, and I say we because this is the religion of my upbringing and because I know so much about it, but we as Christians in the United States really need to step up to the plate and highlight and amplify Palestinian Christians. If Christians are listening to this podcast, I would love to just point out one author that I think is a great place to start. Reverend Munther Isaac. He's a Lutheran reverend out of Bethlehem. And his teachings and his book, On the Other Side of the Wall, is just really important and valuable in this conversation. Sorry, I went on a little diatribe there, Ray.
No, that's okay. That's okay. All right. That was really good. Let's talk a minute about Gaza and Palestine and what's going on over there, because I know that's something, you're passionate about. I mean, what do you think the play is there? What do you think they're trying to do? Are they really trying this time once and for all to, I hate to say it, but it's probably the truth, ethnically cleanse and just get rid of all the Palestinians one way or another?
Motive is difficult to ascertain here. There are certainly people with genocidal intent and motive and the intent of ethnically cleansing Palestinians from Gaza. There is people who want to push for getting the oil that is just offshore in Gaza. So there is definitely people who want that, and they might want it for religious reasons because they think that the land should belong solely to the Jewish people. And they might be doing it for economic reasons and for a lot of different reasons. I think when we look at the context of history, it's very clear that the Israeli government and the Israeli establishment has been ethnically cleansing Palestinians for quite some time. And so we can't just look at the current genocide in Gaza and even the violence in the West Bank without looking at the context of the whole. So is it the intent of everybody in Israel or everybody who is fighting to ethnically cleanse Palestinians? I don't know, and I can't speak to that, but certainly it's enough of those leaders, of those far-right leaders, to be incredibly worried and to merit significant intervention.
Okay. No, that's fair. And I do think, even within Israel, you see kind of what's going on in Tel Aviv, and you see a lot of people basically saying, hey, no, this is not what we're all about. You've got the ultra Orthodox Jews who in New York City and other places have been adamant that, Netanyahu needs to go. This is not Judaism, They say this is their Zionism that is doing all that. So, yeah, it's definitely, I think that far right wing in the Israeli government is definitely leading that charge. Okay, let's move into social media because, man, you and I talked a little bit about this before we hit record, but it's pretty insane to me, the awakening, so to speak, that's taken place on social media. And for me personally, it's really been through Instagram and then through TikTok. Instagram, I've been an active participant. TikTok, I've been more of an observer in that. But talk to us about that. Like what do you see happening in the world with this awakening?
You know, Ray, I think we're living in a very exciting time. I think people complain about and are worried about social media. And I think for good reason. They're worried that kids are spending too much time on there, that it's causing too much comparison. And I think a lot of those things are valid, but also it has caused and created such a democratization of information that we're able to see what's happening and hold people accountable in real time. And we're able to sort of see not only what's happening in Palestine, but what's happening all over the world, and the way that all of these liberation movements and all of this systemic violence and oppression is interconnected. And I think we wouldn't be here. I mean, you and I wouldn't be sitting having this conversation if it wasn't for social media, but we wouldn't be here as a society and as a people who are awake and aware of what's going on if it wasn't for these platforms, which, while there is a lot of criticism of them, they have enabled people who previously would not have had a voice to have a voice and to expose what's happening. So I think that's incredible.
No, absolutely. Let's talk about a couple other places around the globe that maybe you can give us an awareness about. You know, the DRC and the Congo, I did an episode on the podcast about that. And in terms of the lithium and the cobalt, that's a crazy one to me, because like, I feel like that's been going on. That literally did not even take a break from COVID. I don't think the companies that were mining that even cared about COVID. So who knows what the heck went on there? Because I feel like it was business as usual. But where else? What else should be on people's radars right now that, quite frankly, is probably not?
I mean, I'm definitely, first of all, to just address Congo, it means a lot to me that people are talking about Congo. I went to Congo 9 years ago. I saw firsthand the violence, the international manipulation, and the horrors. And so the fact that people are talking about it, and that actually what's happening in Palestine has illuminated what's going on in Congo too, because people are like, what is this sort of imperialism all over the world? That is amazing. I think what's happening in Sudan is also something that people should be looking at. You know, I think, and in Haiti as well, I think that there are imperialist strategies all over the world. And so we can call out these specific countries, and we should look at how do we approach these in a way that's going to amplify voices on the ground and increase the self-determination of the citizens of that country and all of these things. But really looking at how is this imperialism and oppression all connected, and what can we do to address that? And really, it's like people are waking up to the idea that a lot of these conflicts aren't just people in the country wanting to kill each other. And like Congo has been seen as this country that is just destined to be in war. No. There has been 30 years of international manipulation, and a lot of international manipulation before that. So I think people should be aware of all of these things and all of these movements, and really look at what are the factors that these conflicts are rooted in, but also that are perpetuating them.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and you're right. You know, this entire, these platforms, it's like love them and hate them at the same time. I mean, there's a lot of things to hate, but there is a lot of things to love. And the biggest one is giving people the opportunity to, keep governments and countries accountable in real time. Also, turn on a camera. I mean, sometimes I go on TikTok and it'll be like a 15-year-old kid who just flipped his camera around, and he is dropping, or he or she is dropping knowledge. Like, I'm just like, oh my God, this is insane. And they bring receipts, and they do the research, and they take it back to, like, you know, I was watching some things on Palestine. They took it back to the Balfour Declaration of 1917 and the Nakba in 1948, and just the birth of Israel, and then the 6-Day War in 1967. And I'm like, oh my God, you're 15 or 16 or 17. 2017. This is amazing. It really blew my mind to see that. And then the other interesting thing is, like, the 9/11 stuff is getting opened up again. I see so many videos now that it's almost like this situation in Palestine has created like 200 million, if not more, investigative journalists who are now going back and they're looking at 9/11. They're looking at Libya and Gaddafi. They're looking at, like, they were looking at Osama bin Laden again in Iraq and Saddam. And was he really a bad guy, or what was the deal there? It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. All right, what else? What else are you kind of working on these days? And actually, Leah, I'd love for you to share with everybody. I mean, I'll put all your links, and again, I highly recommend everybody follows you on Instagram for sure. But are you working towards something? Like, God, you should write a book. Have you wrote a book yet? I feel like you should totally do that.
I'm definitely in the process of writing a book. Now I have so much respect for people who write a book and finish it, because it is way harder than I thought it was going to be. So I'm working on a book, and this book, one of the things that really launched me into understanding some of these root causes of conflict was I did this portrait and interview series with former fighters, which was called Why We Fight. And I interviewed former combatants all over the world. So I started in Lebanon. I was like 22 years old. I was very naive at the time. Started in Lebanon. I went to Bosnia and Herzegovina. I went to Colombia, Northern Ireland, Iraq, some other places. And I interviewed people who fought in some of these civil conflicts and learned a lot. And it culminated in a gallery experience where I showed the image of the former combatant, and I showed their story, their personal reason for taking up arms. And then I removed identifying information from their story so that people would have to look this person in the eyes, read their story, and then decide for themselves if they felt like they were justified. And then they would flip over a card and see the group that they were a part of in the country. And so that process, both the education process of bringing this project to the US and educating Americans on some of these conflicts, and the process of interviewing these former fighters and learning the history of the United States relationship with some of these countries and the US foreign policy during the Cold War, which is another thing. You were just talking about some of the stuff that's coming up about 9/11 and the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And the U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War has really shaped the world that we live in today, in a lot of negative ways. And so all of this stuff, all my experiences in conflict and post-conflict areas, really illuminated a theory about how to address the root causes of harm and stop violence and oppression at its root. And so the book is about that theory. I've been working on the book for a year, but hopefully we'll get closer to the end with that. And then I'm working on some other projects and really wanting to bring in more of this collective liberation component to my content. I think that I'm so proud of, and I'm so excited for the fact that there are so many people, historians, kids, as you said, who are doing their research and coming with receipts. And there's so many people now who are bringing the information that I feel like I want to start pivoting a little bit and focusing more on these solutions, the stuff that I did for the research of my book, but also just how are we going to harness this awakening into real and sustainable change? So that is what's kind of consuming my mind these days, because I don't want us to miss what's happening right now. We are in a very pivotal moment in history, and more people are awake and aware than ever before about the harm that has been going on for decades and centuries. And now that people are awake and aware, we have to encourage them and help them believe that things are changeable, because it's those two things that is the foundation for creating a movement. It's the foundation for creating lasting change and addressing these things at their root. And so that's kind of what I'm working on. And I really, I want to bring more hope, because I feel and hope is like an exercise, right? This is something I have to think about almost daily. How am I refilling this? But I really want to bring hope, because my fear right now is that we'll think that these forces and these powers and these powerful people and their resources and all of it is too much, that we can't address this, that we're not going to create lasting change, that we should just give up now. So I want to make sure that I'm harnessing this energy and I'm bringing hope and I'm providing tools for us all to be more effective and pointing people to tools, people who came before us, researchers, movement leaders, all of that stuff. So that's really that's where I'm going. But obviously this is founded in all of this research and information and being raised a Christian Zionist and obviously growing from that. So yeah, that's
all very cool. And I will tell you, Gen Z, I mean, gosh, you might even be part of Gen Z now that I think
I'm
about
not.
it.
I'm right on the cusp. 95.
Okay. All right. So I'll tell you, I'm blown away with this generation. I mean, prior to this, I kind of was like, these kids are lazy. These kids give, I'm going to swear a second, but they give zero fucks. Like they just don't care. They have no baggage and they're just like, you know what? Fuck off. We're calling a spade. There is, which is my tagline, actually calling a spade. Like, but there is a absolute line for them between right and wrong. And I love that. So everything you just said, and I mean, it's very hard to lose kind of hope and to lose faith and to be like, oh my God, what can I do to affect this? But man, that Gen Z, they don't have that mindset, which is amazing. And it's a little bit contagious. It's definitely contagious for me. I get motivated from those guys. Let me ask you two questions. In terms of the fighters that, it's funny when you started saying that, I thought you were interviewing like boxers or UFC combatants. I thought fighters in that regard, but you're talking about people who have gone to combat. Was there a common thread as to why they did it? Was there, did you see some consistencies between them? And what was the age of these fighters? Were they all like younger?
There was a big range. Most of them had, they were former fighters. So they were no longer members of the groups that they had been a part of. And the age range kind of all over the place. There were people who had quit, 20 years ago. There were people who had just fought a few years ago. So there was a good kind of mix of ages in there. And then obviously, like some of the people that I interviewed had fought in the Lebanese Civil War, which was a long time ago. But then some people had fought in, say, the Colombian Civil War, which ended more recently. But the common thread, when people were in the gallery and they read all of the stories, they could not figure out what story belonged to which group before they turned over the card. And a lot of that is because all of these stories sound so similar. People couldn't figure out what was the fighter that the U.S. supported versus the fighter that, was considered a U.S. Enemy. There was one guy whose dad had a $5 million bounty on his head for kidnapping, and killing 3 Americans. And you would not be able to pick that guy out of some of the people that fought for maybe some of the groups that the U.S. has supported. And so the common threads is really this, like, fear was a common thread, the idea that you had to fight, that there was no other option, victimization, this idea that you had been wronged and that someone had taken power over you, and it is your duty or responsibility to take your power back, and to do so by picking up arms, by taking power over somebody else. And in all of these common threads, all of these stories, I really wouldn't be able to confidently say that I wouldn't do the same thing in their position. And that's where I was like, I need to come back to the States and really get this point across for Americans, because we have so much influence in the world, and we do not understand the root causes of some of these people who are fighting against us. And if we understood the root motivations, if we understood these root causes, we would be able to build peace. But we're just doing these cycles of violence because we're not seeing the other side as human. We're not understanding why they decided to fight. And it's getting us in these ruts, which is obviously intentional because we have the military industrial complex and a lot of people benefiting from and profiting from this. But if the American public wakes up, it basically creates an atmosphere where those people can't continue manipulating people. So yeah, that was a long
Absolutely.
answer to your
No,
question.
it was perfect because again, I've said this 100 times on my podcast. It's like it's not Americans that are doing this. It's a very small. I used to say, I've always said it's not Americans, and then I used to say it's the government. And then I'm like, it's not even the government. It is a small faction within the government. You know, there is a small coalition, and the more people wake up to this, the more people realize concepts like the military industrial complex, which I've talked about a ton, the more they understand the uniparty, the more they understand that like Republicans like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and all these guys are no different than Democrats like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and that group. And these people, these career politicians who have, went into office worth $5 and now after a 30-year public service career, their net worth is 150 million. How does that happen? That doesn't happen from government jobs. Once people kind of wake up to that and realize it shouldn't be about pitting individuals against each other, but it's about holding these people accountable to not be able to really go after their own agenda while we're sitting here fighting about X, Y, and Z, fighting about, signs on bathrooms and things like that. That is the awakening that I'm hoping happens. That is the awakening that people stop fighting with each other and start really being like, wait a minute. This is who we should talk about. It's funny. There was a video I just saw where this guy was like, if you take 100 red ants and put 100 black ants in the same jar, nothing happens. But then if you shake that jar up and cause chaos, the red ants start to kill the black ants and the black ants start to kill the red ants. And the moral of the story is the problem is the person that shook the jar. That's who we should be going after. And we should be figuring out who's shaking these jars because they're the problem. It's not the red ants and it's not the black ants. So anyway, there's my little analogy. All right, listen, I know you were pressed
Great
for
analogy.
time. So I'm gonna leave this here, but I'm gonna hold you to something, and that is I've got to have you back on because I've got a bunch more questions and I want to delve into more things, but I know you're a little bit pressed for time today. So I really appreciate it. I love the fact that you kind of helped us understand the Christian nationalism, Christian Zionism. You kind of helped us understand kind of the awakening that's going on globally. Is besides your Instagram, do you want to tell everybody where they can find you? Are there other platforms that you really use a lot?
So I'm also on TikTok. I'm trying to get more into LinkedIn and YouTube, but I just have not built out that as much. So you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok. Thank you so much, Ray, by the way. I've loved this conversation and I would love to come back and discuss.
It'll be our pleasure to have you back. I'll get those links. I'll put them in the show notes. I wish you safe travels. I'm not going to tell people where you're going, but I wish you safe travels and we will talk soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ray.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallow